Chapter 5 Air Spy. Julianne and Clem listened in fascination while Nancy translated what was engraved on the coin. It was in French. At the top were the initials P.F. and underneath a short prayer. "Père Francois!" exclaimed Julianne. "I'm sure it is," said Nancy. "He must have dropped it in this area, or else the Indians took it away from him and lost it themselves." There was no date on the metal disc, but the girls assumed it was over 300 years old. "This isn't exactly a good luck piece," Nancy stated. "It's much more." Clem looked at her intently. "Whatever it is, it don't mean nothing to me. I bought it from the lad who found it. I'm giving it to you, Nancy." "May I pay you something for it?" she asked. Clem Rucker laughed. "What would I do with a lot of money? I only gave that lad 25 cents, so I'm not out much." "Well, this is a fabulous gift," said Nancy, "and I shall treasure it." "Anyway," said Clem, standing up, "I hope it brings you good luck in solving the mystery of the hollow oak. We'd better go on." He followed a course due east, and in about half an hour they came to another hollow oak. This one was still standing, and from its size they judged it was centuries old. Clem said he thought the tree might have been there as long as 400 years. Nancy walked around the oak and found a rotted-out section. She beamed her flashlight inside and put her face to the edge of the hole to see what was in the cavity. Unfortunately, she found nothing. No marker was showing, but there was definitely a hump at one place in the bark. Clem produced a chisel from his car. He and Nancy took turns chipping and peeling off bark until they uncovered part of a lead plate. A short time later, the three searchers became aware of a helicopter circling overhead. As they glanced up, Nancy detected someone with binoculars looking at them. "He's spying on us!" The copter suddenly flew off and disappeared, but not before Nancy had opened her purse and written down the license number on a pad. She suspected that Kit Cadle might be a passenger in the helicopter, and she meant to find out. "Have you ever seen that copter before?" Nancy asked Clem. "Oh, yes," the farmer replied. "Guess he's one of them freelance pilots. Takes folks up to give 'em a bird's-eye view of the burial mounds and the river." Meanwhile, Julianne, who had taken the chisel from Clem, had chipped off more of the bark. Suddenly she exclaimed, "Here's another Père Francois plate! There's no date on this one, and only the initials P.F., but I can see a faint arrow. This one points directly south." "It may lead to what was once an Indian settlement," Nancy mused. "We know Père Francois traveled from village to village trying to convert the Indians." "Could be," said the farmer. "But I don't reckon we can find out today. I'm sorry, ladies, but I have to get home now and tend to my chores." "When can you help us again?" Nancy asked him. Clem said he would not be able to for another 3 days, and did not know of anyone else who might take Nancy around on her search. "Anyway," said Julianne, "I won't be able to leave the dig." Nancy was disappointed over the delay, but in the meantime she would try to find out about the helicopter pilot and who his passenger was. Clem took a shortcut back to the dig. The girls thanked him for the trip and said they would expect him in 3 days. As Clem drove away, Nancy thought, "I'll have to figure a way to get to town so I can find out about that copter." It was nearly supper time, and the diggers had stopped work. Nancy and Julianne found the other girls preparing a wholesome meal. Meanwhile, the boys were cleaning the artifacts and fossils which they had discovered at the bottom of a new pit. All of them were eager to hear what progress Nancy had made on her case. She related the details, including Clem's story about the catfish. The others laughed, and Art burst into a song from the opera Porgy and Bess about Catfish Row. When he finished, Nancy announced, "I'd like to drive someplace to make a phone call. I forgot to ask Clem if he has a telephone." Art spoke up. "I have a 2-seater motorcycle here," he told her. "I'll be glad to take you to town." "That's wonderful," Nancy said. "Could we go tomorrow morning?" "You bet," he said. "But it'll have to be early. My shift begins at 10 a.m. "Where do you think the pilot came from?" Nancy asked. Art said there was a small airfield outside the town of Walmsley, the nearest one to the dig. They had a very early breakfast and left the dig site at 7 o'clock. Art drove directly to Walmsley and went on to the airfield, which was about 3 miles out of town. When they arrived, Nancy stepped into the office and asked who owned the helicopter with the license number she had copied on her pad. She showed it to the man in charge. "Oh, that's Roscoe Thompson," he replied. "Is he around now? I'd like to speak to him," Nancy said. Thompson was at the end of the field checking his helicopter. Nancy and Art walked over to him. Roscoe proved to be a very pleasant young man and gladly answered Nancy's questions. His passenger the day before had been a man named Tom Wilson. "Where does he come from?" Nancy questioned. "I really don't know. He didn't talk much. Said he wanted to make the trip over the site of the various Indian burial mounds. Mr. Wilson was interested to learn their locations because he's an amateur archaeologist." "By the way," Roscoe went on, "Mr. Wilson was very curious about 2 girls and a man who were hacking at an oak tree. Was one of them you?" "Yes," Nancy admitted. "Why did your passenger want to know what I was doing?" "He didn't say." Roscoe asked Nancy if she would like to speak to Tom Wilson. When she said yes, the pilot told her he expected the man to arrive at the airfield about mid-morning. "I'll introduce you," he said. This was just what Nancy wanted. She turned to Art. "Could you possibly stay a little longer?" The archaeology student shook his head. "Sorry, but a promise is a promise. I must be back at the dig by 10. Several of us are working on a certain section, and each one has a particular task." "I understand," Nancy said. Seeing Nancy's look of disappointment, Art said, "Maybe this Tom Wilson will get here before 10. I can give you half an hour. In the meantime, I'll run into town and pick up some food supplies." Nancy was grateful. "I'll make a few phone calls. If Mr. Wilson should arrive, will you let me know?" she asked Roscoe. "Will do." The young detective hurried to a phone booth alongside the airfield building. She called her home, hoping her father would still be there, but he had already left for his law office. Hannah Gruen reported that everything was fine, and Bess and George were eager to join Nancy. "They still want to help you solve the mystery. That is, unless you have already done so." "I'm far from solving it," Nancy answered. "The case is fascinating, but I'm making very slow progress. By the way, can you write or telegraph me in care of Clem Rucker at Walmsley? He'll bring the message over to the dig." Nancy had just said this when there was a tap on the glass door of the booth. She turned to see Roscoe standing there. As Nancy pushed open the door a crack, the pilot said, "Here comes Mr. Wilson now." End of chapter 5.